we're going to take you on a journey. In the picturesque rolling hills of mid-Wales, we shall find several lakes that were not here a century and a half ago. Near to Rhyadr is the Llanwddyn. This is home to a series of reservoirs that were built in the 1890s to supply water to the people of Birmingham. About 30 miles west of Shrewsbury, we find their older brother, a lake that feeds much needed water to the city of Liverpool. Welcome to the beautiful Vyrnwy Valley. My name is David Rowlands. I was the last resident agent for Liverpool Corporation Water Department before the undertaking was transferred to Severn Trent Water Authority in 1974. I was responsible not only for the reservoir and the water in it, but also for the farms and forests on the land surrounding it. Later I'm going to take you on an imaginary trip into the old village, where we will talk about the lives of the people who used to live there and the history of the area. And after that, we'll tell you about the construction of the dam.
I'm Mary Jordan, and although I live 70 miles away in Worcestershire, I've been coming here for my holidays and short breaks for the last 25 years. Later on, I'll take you on a short trip around the lake to show you what there is for visitors.
Our story starts hundreds of millions of years ago, when the valley didn't exist and the area was flat. It was covered by a shallow sea, and rivers that flowed from distant hills brought down mud that settled on the sea floor. This mud thickened, and gradually pressure formed it into the rock that will become so important to our story. Millions of years passed. Then the earth's crust heaved, the land rose above sea level, and nearby a volcano erupted to form the present Brython Hills. Eventually the earth settled down. The dinosaurs ruled and perished. Then, 2 million years ago, we drifted into a series of ice ages. The U-shaped valleys we see around us came from the last one. They were formed as ice ground down through the foothills, taking with it the softer earth beneath. Finally, the ice melted, and a bar of hard rock at the neck of the Vyrnwy Valley held back the water to form a natural lake. During thousands of years, storms broke over the vast moorlands. Streams rose quickly, bringing down soil that silted the river mouths and crept ever further into the lake. This happened at Bala, where the head of the lake has been covered in sediment, making the expanse of water much smaller than it once was. At Vyrnwy, the silt gradually rose until it was higher than the rock at the valley neck. All the water had now drained away, leaving little sign that a lake had ever existed. When Queen Victoria was midway through her long reign, our valley was largely unknown to the outside world. It is tucked away in North Montgomeryshire, on the southern foothills of the Berwyn Mountains. But even then Vyrnwy had a few visitors. They came mainly to fish in the rivers and shoot in the surrounding hills. We must remember that this is one of the wettest places in Britain, where the sun can quickly disappear as rain falls on the surrounding hills. Even though the land on the valley floor was very flat, there was little arable farming. This was because the water flowing off the surrounding slopes had made most of the land boggy and only suitable for growing rushes. Any remaining land was used mainly for grazing, although a small area was suitable for growing crops such as oats, barley, rye and root vegetables. More than half the houses around the parish were farms on the valley floor or on the flanks of the hills. They were mainly built with local materials, stones gathered from the fields or riverbed, and roofed with local slate or reed thatch. Across the lake is the valley of the River Cedig, which used to run through the village. We'll now take you on an imaginary journey through the village as we might have done 120 years ago. The River Vyrnwy starts from Ruaga and meanders down the length of the valley. Below us it spreads out and passes beneath Pont Gwenydd. On the left, the River Cedig flows across the fields and into the Vyrnwy. Where it meets the road from the bridge in the middle distance is the village of Llanwddyn. Coming down to Pont Gwenydd, the village lies across the fields. As we pass over the bridge, we can see the buildings more clearly. The white one in the centre is the school, and to its right is the Talabont Inn on Fish Street. Now, let us set off on a gentle stroll up to the village centre. A map will be very useful to keep track of our travels. It shows clearly how the River Cedig flows through the village with Pont Cedig at its centre. We won't trouble the two locals on the bridge, as they appear to be too busy putting the world to rights. Beyond them, we have a glimpse of the parish church, and the school we saw from Pont Gwenydd is behind the trees on the right. The main road leading west up the valley later joins the narrow tracks that pass over the hills to Bala and Dinas. It takes only a short walk past the school to bring us to two of the most important buildings of the village, the church and the hotel. The church is named after St. John of Jerusalem, as the Knights Hospitallers of St. John owned the manor in the 13th century. They originally built a stone church devoted to their patron saint, and the tradition has carried on with this building now dedicated to St. John the Baptist. The hotel is the Powys Arms. It is mainly used by the few visitors that are attracted to the valley by the shooting and fishing. The three ladies chatting in the porch are the Davis sisters. They are responsible for the hotel and must be good at their job, as a later visit finds them running the new Lake Vyrnwy Hotel. Looking at these people posing outside, we can see that it is quite a respectable establishment. Most are unknown, but the ladies in the porch could be the Davis sisters. The man in uniform on the right is a Jones, either Special Constable David or Postman Robert, as their uniforms are similar. We discover that the young lad is Jack Williams, but he wouldn't tell us where he was going or what he was up to. Opposite the church wall is the home of the village tailor, Rhys Jones, and his wife Anne. This is as far as we will go along this road, so we will turn round and return to the village centre. Once across the bridge, we turn left into Fish Street. Just north of the bridge, we pass the Talabont Inn. This is run by William Richards and his wife Mary. Their son Richard is a carrier, and he and his wife Sarah also have their home in the pub. Further on, we find more villagers passing the time of day. The young girl is Vyrnwy Morris, and possibly the young boy with her is her brother. The road continues past the house in the distance and up to the corn mill, where Hugh Shadrick is the miller. Many years after the mill closed, one of the original stones still survives. Apparently it came from Anglesey and is now found outside the present-day school. Our map shows clearly that the last road from the village has few houses on it, but leads to the vicarage standing just above the new lakeside road. I think that now it's about time we looked for some liquid refreshment. Strolling back to the crossroads, we find the Cross Guns Inn beckoning to us. Seated at the bar with a foaming pint, we chat to mine hosts, David Hughes and his sister Margaret Ellis. Margaret tells us that she is unfortunately a widow at only 28. Having quenched our thirst, we will wander across the street to the post office and Draper's. The sign tells us that the shop is owned by Jane Jones. John Ellis, the wheelwright, is loitering outside. He assures us that he is only taking a short breather away from his workshop close by. Now it is time to stroll down the slope back towards Pont Gwynedd. On the right we can see the Wesleyan Methodist Chapel set back from the road. Chapels also have a caretaker's house attached. The sign tells us that this one is used as a shop by Elizabeth Owen. It is surprising what jobs some villagers have, as Elizabeth's husband John is a horse jockey and her father had been a noted preacher. Lower down the street, the Calvinist chapel lies just behind the tree, and the building in the distance houses another David Jones, this one the shoemaker, and his wife Mary. Now we will end our imaginary trip back at the starting point at Pont Gwynedd. The English translation of Pont Gwynedd is Wheatfield Bridge. This tells us that there was a little land in the valley good enough to grow wheat. The villagers produced almost all they needed, apart from iron tools and a few consumables such as tea and sugar. These were paid for by exports of cattle and sheep. Their houses were heated by peat from the mountains, cut in the spring and stacked to dry out before being carried home in the autumn. Lighting was by rush lights, which were like candles made with peeled rushes soaked in rancid animal fat and gripped by these holders. Like tallow candles, they gave off a dim light with a foul smell of burning flesh. The majority worked on the farms, but the census of 1881 shows that there were also a number of tradesmen in the parish. The only people of professional status were the vicar, chapel ministers and a schoolmaster.
There were some occupations you would never hear of today. One of these was cattle tumbler. Sean Vower, Big John Evans of Pengraig, was a cattle tumbler. His work involved catching cattle by the horns and throwing them off their feet so that they could be shod for the long journey on foot to the markets of southeast England. Often he would work as far afield as Bala, walking 12 miles each way and carrying out this arduous work. When he wasn't cattle tumbling, he used to make baskets, but he met his death cutting rushes for thatching in the bog in the valley of the Vyrnwy. They worked a 6-day week then, and on Sunday they used to enjoy themselves. They used to play football, enjoyed cockfighting, and throwing Mein Kampf, the 75.5-pound stone. They also used to dance, to music played by Edward the Creed, the cobbler, on his fiddle. However, about the middle of the century, the chapel elders decided that Sunday should be a more solemn day, and they bought Edward the Creed's fiddle for 15 shillings and broke it up, thus ending the dancing and starting what now becomes thought of as traditional Welsh Sunday. As well as conventional religion, there were older traditions, men who practised folk medicine and white magic. One of these men was Dick Spot, who put down a troublesome spirit at the farm of Cunanisa, near the present site of the dam. He enclosed it in a quill and hid it under a rock in the river, where it had to remain until the river dried up. We will hear more of this one later.
There were several larger houses in the valley, but we will concern ourselves with the fate of 2 of them. Rhywargor is situated at the head of the valley, near a sharp bend in the road to Bala. It is still standing, though today it is not used and looking rather derelict. The largest house in the valley, Einand Hall, was situated on the valley floor near the Dinas Road. It had once been the ancestral home of the Wynn family, but they had left a long time before. Most recently it was owned by a landowner in Dinas Mawddwy and used as a shooting lodge. We have had a brief glimpse of how the villagers lived, and as they entered the second half of the 19th century, the valley residents went about their business just as they had done for generations. We must leave the peaceful Vyrnwy Valley for a short time and travel 60 miles northeast over the Mersey to the fast-growing town of Liverpool. In 1800 it was about the size of present-day Shrewsbury. Then it grew. Only 40 years later it had become even bigger than Wolverhampton is now. The town had grown up mainly round the docks, which themselves grew to cover over 7 miles of the banks of the River Mersey. The wealthy erected many fine buildings, which proved that there were fortunes to be made from all the trade passing through the waterfront. However, an enormous problem arose due to the huge increase in population and the vast number of ships using the port. There was simply not enough clean water available to satisfy the overwhelming demand. At this time there was a great potato famine in Ireland. Many of those facing starvation emigrated to Liverpool. Some went straight on to North America, but a large number remained in the city. Also the Welsh arrived from the poorer parts of rural North Wales. Increasing pressure was felt in the already overcrowded town centre. All over the town the demand for water grew faster than it could be provided. As a result, the shortage of water and lack of sewers caused severe health problems. As trade flourished, the number of visiting seamen kept on increasing. They brought with them diseases such as cholera, typhoid and dysentery that could only spread in the overcrowded conditions. Initially, water had come from local springs and wells, but these had become polluted with human waste, and the deep wells that were sunk could not keep up with demand. Fresh water became both expensive and scarce. It was supplied only 2 or 3 times a week, and then only for 2 or 3 hours at a time. In 1847, it became essential to look outside the town boundaries for unpolluted water. Work started 3 years later to divert the waters of the rivers Douglas and Roddlesworth. They were to flow into 5 reservoirs that were built at Rivington in East Lancashire. In 7 years, the first large-scale water undertaking outside London was in use. An aqueduct 17 miles long took the water to 2 reservoirs at Prescott on the outskirts of Liverpool. It was not long before even this supply became inadequate. There was a serious drought only 14 years later, and the water was only turned on for a few hours daily. Once again cholera started to spread, and so it became imperative to find more water. A number of places were looked at: Windermere, Thirlmere and Haweswater in the Lake District, and Bala Lake and the Vyrnwy Valley in North Wales. Most were gradually eliminated for various reasons. For example, raising the level of Bala Lake would have cut the new railway line to Dolgellau. In fact, the water would have covered the present-day narrow-gauge train running on the old track bed. Also, the water from the lake flowed down the Dee to the Horseshoe Falls, where it was fed into the Llangollen Canal. The canal owners, the London and North Western Railway, strongly objected to any loss that would have occurred if Liverpool had taken water from Bala Lake. Then, in the late 1870s, Liverpool Corporation decided that the plan to flood the Vyrnwy Valley was by far the best, and set out to obtain powers to construct a dam and reservoir. Now came the usual horse trading that went with taking a bill through Parliament. Finally, on the 6th of August 1880, the Act received the royal assent. Plans were made to construct a dam and lake that would become the largest artificial reservoir in Europe. The small town of Llanwddyn became very important to the building of the dam. One of the first tasks for Mr. Martin, the dam's local engineer, was to arrange for the supply of any material and machinery that could not be produced locally. Fortunately, Llanwddyn was the terminus of a Cambrian railway branch line that came in from Oswestry via Llanwddyn. Any goods could be brought into the railhead and taken by horse and cart to Vyrnwy. To make this possible, the road between Llanwddyn and Llanwddyn had to be straightened and gradients eased. Just before Llanwddyn, the old road is now only a grassy track. It had to be abandoned as it was too steep and is replaced by a hairpin bend. Some bridges had to be repaired and others built to allow the heavy loads to cross 3 streams. At the same time, a completely new road had to be constructed before excavation could start. This was to enable people to gain access to the valley while avoiding the dam foundations. The river was diverted into a controlled channel and a cofferdam built to keep the water out. The original idea had been to construct an earth dam, as can be seen from this early plan. This shows both the intended earth embankment and the side discharge channel for overflow water. The dam would have been similar to that built much later at Llanwddyn. Unfortunately, records don't show who gave authority for the change to a masonry dam, or in fact why it was changed. This was very strange, as no large dam in Britain had been built in stone, and it was known to be a very expensive option. The one thing that made a masonry dam possible was when the engineers found the bar of hard rock that had been formed across the mouth of the valley. This was an ideal surface on which to build the foundations and support the tons of masonry that would be needed. The same hard rock was ideal for providing the stone needed for the dam itself. Fortunately, a supply was found only a mile to the north, and so a new quarry was opened with Mr. Bickerton in charge of the operation. A primitive floodlighting system had to be erected because work went on from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. weekdays and from 6 a.m. to noon on Saturdays. One of the later complaints was the amount of unusable stone that was produced. A narrow gauge railway system was built to carry blocks of stone, some as heavy as 10 tons. The track led down to a holding site with several sidings and then down to the dam itself. The rails were of 3-foot gauge and small tank engines pulled an assortment of trucks. The quarrymen were more skilled than the general labourers and were mostly Welshmen from neighbouring districts. An undertaking of this size needed over 1,000 workers compared to the total village population of around 400. Some of the workmen were locals with homes nearby, but many were itinerant navvies who had heard about the work. Those workers who could not go home, either daily or at weekends, were housed in the valley. Many old buildings, even cowsheds and pigsties, were used after a quick repair. However, most of the workers lived in two specially built barrack blocks. One set was built by the side of the new road above the dam site and is now covered by the water at the edge of the lake. The other set was near to the quarry, on what are now the main buildings of the Lake Vyrnwy farm. As usual in such works, injuries happened, and so a surgeon was employed and a hospital erected near the quarry. The other main buildings were the offices and stables built by the dam. Quite an impressive house was built for the use of the engineer and his staff. Although it was only meant to be temporary, it was well constructed, even though it came to be given the fanciful title of the shanty. While the villagers had to put up with a large influx of workers, there is no doubt that the 3 pubs and the shops in the village must have done a roaring trade. It wasn't only the men who had a hard life, some of the women had a hard time as well. I'm going to introduce you to Enid Jones of Melina Green near Llanwddyn, who will tell you about her grandmother.
Yes, my grandmother lived in a small holding at Bryn, and she sold butter and eggs down in the village in Llanwddyn, which would be about 3 miles away. And then she obviously must have heard about the building of the dam at Llanwddyn and realised that she could have a little bit more money if she took them there. And she walked something between 10 to 12 miles with a basket of eggs on one arm, a basket of butter on the other, just to have an extra penny.
The official start of the construction took place on the 4th of July 1881. A large crowd joined the 3rd Earl of Powys when he unveiled a plaque at the northeast end of the dam, even though some of the early work had already been carried out. Now work began in earnest, and the local inhabitants must have stood back in awe as the human diggers and steam cranes moved in. The first task was to excavate down to the bedrock so that there was a firm base on which to build the foundations. The surface of the rock was jagged, so some of the projecting points were blasted off. Also, the bedrock sloped and so had to be stepped to accept the stonework. By 1883, the masonry was 35 feet high, but still well below the original ground level on the right. To get some idea of depth, the Earl's plaque is on the right. During the next 2 years, the height of the dam doubled and was now above ground level. 5 years after building started, the dam was becoming recognizable. Next to the channel containing the river, the compensation tunnel was starting to be built. At the opposite end of the dam, a tunnel was being completed through which the river would be diverted. This was done so that the ground covered by the original bypass channel could be excavated and masonry placed on it. Over the final 2 years, the dam rose to its full height and the stonework to support the road finished. The dam itself was completed by 1890 when the lake was full. 2 years later, the first of the pipes delivered water into what had now become the city of Liverpool. The dam was the first to carry overflow water over its crest. The pool at the foot of the dam forms a water cushion. This prevents the force of the overflow from eroding the foundations. Condensation water had to be allowed to flow down the river for the benefit of people who had enjoyed it before. These included farmers and the owners of watermills and canals. The weir maintains the water cushion and provides a check that the correct amount of water is being released into the river. A pipe was laid through the dam to allow this water to pass through, and originally the powerhouse had been built to control this amount. In 1902, Liverpool Corporation altered the powerhouse to provide electricity for their offices, workshops and sawmill, and for the houses in the new village. In the background is the Aber conduit, an alternative draw-off built in the 1930s. The straining tower is the most spectacular of the ancillary works, and its almost Rhine-like outline is now such a recognised part of the valley. Water is taken from the lake at the tower, where its draw-off level can be controlled, and it can be strained to stop rubbish getting into the aqueduct. It then passes through a culvert under the lake to the start of a 2¼ mile tunnel which takes it to Vyrnwy, where it passes into pipes. To make sure the water was pure, a filtration plant was constructed at Oswestry, comprising a reservoir and several sander filtration beds. At the time the dam was built, this was the only practical way of filtering water on a large scale. There are a number of small balancing reservoirs in the aqueduct to Liverpool, and one at Norton near Runcorn had to be built as a tower because of the level of the ground. Finally, the water pipes pass under the Manchester Ship Canal and the River Mersey near Runcorn Bridge on their way to the reservoirs at Prescott. For the people living in the Vyrnwy Valley, the 28th of November 1888 was a date they would always remember. On that day, the dam was sufficiently complete for the valves to be closed. The waters rose to cover the fields, and the buildings that were to be submerged were pulled down. It was then that the villagers finally had to say farewell to their old homes. For many of them, the valley had been the only way of life they had known. Many had never ventured far from the valley, and it must have been hard to accept that their lives had been changed for the benefit of a people living many miles away. The large house at Inant Hall eventually suffered the same fate as the village. It had one final use, as after the land had been purchased, the Water Committee used it for themselves. They must have done themselves well, as it was nicknamed Brandy and Soda Lodge. Smoke from the chimney showed that it was used right up to the time it was lapped by the rising waters. However, before the old village of Llanwddyn finally became nothing more than a memory, the corporation had to build a chapel, school, hotel, church, and a number of farms and houses for those made homeless by the lake. The church was built on a bank about 1/4 mile from the dam, and was consecrated and dedicated to St. Llanwddyn on the day before the dam valves were closed. Very little was transferred from the old church except for the graves. This was because the new church had to be ready before the old one was dismantled. Early on in the dam project, it became obvious that there would be a need for a hotel. This was to replace the 3 inns in the old village that had been destroyed. It would become a mecca for those wishing to fish the lake and arrange shooting parties round its shores. Apparently, the first site chosen was on this tree-covered plateau above Ruaga House. This was not used as it would have been impossible to prevent sewage from the hotel seeping into the lake. Where the hotel is now, the views up the lake are as good, and the sewage could be treated and the clean water let into the River Vyrnwy below the dam. There is an obelisk near the hotel car park in memory of those who died during the building of the dam. A Calvinist Methodist chapel with 2 houses was built near the dam, but closed in 1970 and is now the RSPB headquarters. A school and master's house were built below the dam. They saw continuous use until 1950, when they were replaced by a new school and the old school converted into a workshop. The flow of Vyrnwy water solved Liverpool's immediate problems, but further developments later took place under the original Act. 2 small rivers, the Llanwddyn and the Markland, once flowed into the Vyrnwy downstream of the dam. In order to obtain more water, they were diverted into the lake in 1902 and 1908 respectively. The waters of the Llanwddyn were dammed and diverted through a mile-long tunnel into an outlet on the southwest side of the lake. The Markland is on the other side of the valley. Here, workmen built the dam and tunnel to send the water into the lake. This tunnel was 1.5 miles long and discharged water into the lake below the hotel. During the years that followed, there were further developments, both in the transport of water and in the landscape around the Vyrnwy Valley. There was a second pipe to Liverpool completed in 1905. In March 1910, the Prince of Wales formally marked the completion of the works at Vyrnwy by unveiling a plaque and planting an oak tree. Between the 2 world wars, powers were obtained to build an alternative draft known as the Aber conduit. Water can be diverted through this pipe when the straining tower or the Hernan tunnel are shut down for maintenance. In the 1930s, a third pipe was installed. 10 years later, 28 miles of a fourth pipe had been laid. However, modern pumps enabled extra water to be carried in the 3 existing pipes. The mid-20th century saw the end of construction, as the far-sighted original plan of 1880 had secured Liverpool's need for water for 70 years. However, our story is not complete without a look at the significant developments on the land around Lake Vyrnwy. The decision to plant much of the valley sides with conifers meant several tenants had to give up their farms and move elsewhere. The planting was intended to stop erosion, slow the rate of runoff of water, and to keep livestock away from the edge of the lake and the tributary streams. This was a mistake because due to the greatly increased leaf area of the trees compared to that of grassland, more water is lost to the atmosphere by evaporation. Besides which, erosion is not a big problem and occurs anywhere when timber is felled. Also, modern water treatment can easily deal with a low level of pollution from livestock. Liverpool also became involved in a large farming enterprise run on traditional lines. The last major development in Llanwddyn took place in 1950. Liverpool Corporation provided the money for 14 houses, 6 bungalows and a community centre, and Montgomeryshire County Council allotted money for a new school. A joint opening luncheon was held at Abertrydda on the 30th of September. Finally, the curtain came down on Liverpool Corporation's interest in the water undertaking in 1974. The lake enterprise was broken up, with the aqueduct and distribution network going to North West Water and Lake Vyrnwy to Severn Trent Water.
One of the last acts of Liverpool Corporation Water Department at Lake Vyrnwy was to reach an agreement in 1972 with the RSPB for the establishment of a wildlife reserve on the estate. I hope you found this account of the history of the area interesting, and I'll now hand over to Mary, who will tell you what you will see as a tourist today at Lake Vyrnwy.
Thank you, David. The valley is now run by a partnership which includes RSPB, Severn Trent Water, Forestry Commission for Wales and Countryside Council for Wales. The hotel is also involved because it has the shooting and fishing rights. The early work of the RSPB involved advising how the valley wildlife should be protected. Now it does a great deal of work on the high moorland, managing the heather to provide a habitat for a variety of birds. For the visitor there is a year-long programme of events, details of which can be found in the What's On guide. Anyone wanting to know more about the valley wildlife should visit the RSPB shop by the dam. There the helpful staff will only be too pleased to provide you with any information you may need. The RSPB is very important nationally as it runs educational programmes for schools using the land's natural features. The outdoor education is linked to school learning, especially the national curriculum. Behind the scenes, the RSPB and Severn Trent have been partners in the estate farm since 1996. This is now the largest organic farm in England and Wales, using a mixture of arable and livestock farming. In the 1940s, drains were dug on the moorland above the lake to dry them out and to improve grazing. Now grants have been obtained to block these drains and restore the upper moorlands to the original blanket boglands. Severn Trent Water is the most influential partner, but its main work is obviously managing the provision of water for the lake. Behind the Severn Trent offices is a small cinema where an impressive audio-visual display introduces the visitor to the beauty of the valley. The water company has also been influential in setting up the sculpture park below the dam. The Forestry Commission for Wales is responsible for the coniferous woodlands. Trees are planted to fit in with the landscape. They are felled both for commercial purposes and to enhance the views round the estate, especially from the lakeside road. Around the lake we will see the effect the partnership has had, with the provision of walks, picnic areas, hides, signs and interpretation boards. There is a small car park just below the RSPB shop, and at one end is the Pleasant Artisans Cafe. This building once housed the village sawmill built in 1906. It was converted into a shop and a cafe in the 1980s. Across the car park is an RSPB hide, the first of 3 we will find during our travels round the lake. Then it's only a short stroll down the road until we come across a small cluster of buildings, now known as the village workshops. Originally these were the stables used by Liverpool Corporation when haulage and timber extraction was carried out by horses. Montgomeryshire District Council converted them into a series of craft workshops in 1988. The Valley Arts and Crafts was founded in 2005. Its members exhibit a wide selection of their work in the gallery, and the shop is manned by the artists themselves. The local tourist information office is found in the far corner of the yard, next to a pleasant cafe. It is a vital stop if you are new to the area. The friendly staff are only too willing to answer any queries you may have. They can provide maps for walkers, cyclists and those travelling by car, as well as offer information about what can be found further afield. Between the old stables and the sawmill is the house that was originally built by Liverpool Corporation for their resident engineer. It is now a private dwelling called the Oaks, owned by Mr. and Mrs. Duggleby, and is the first one we have seen that offers the visitor bed and breakfast. However, there are other houses in the area that offer accommodation in comfortable surroundings. Einand Farm was built to replace the old farm that had been flooded by the lake. As well as being a family home, it also offers the visitor self-catering accommodation. There are several caravan sites dotted about the area if you would like to be independent and stay for longer breaks. One site on the Llanwddyn road is also a very active farm. It caters for both holiday residents and touring caravans. Linda and Neil Jones specialise in the rearing of Texel sheep, horses and Labradors. Set in among the tall trees below the dam is the International Sculpture Park, which contains the carvings of artists from around the world. Much credit for this remarkable collection must go to Tom Gillespie, a sculptor of international repute who lives at Llanwddyn. His influence and contacts have brought artists from East European countries together each September to work with their Welsh counterparts. Andy Hancock has also been influential in the valley. His name can be seen on many carvings, and we will find that his work is spread round the lake. It is probably best to start your visit to the sculpture trail at the car park below the village. Go through the Wild Boar Gate to a new path set out by the side of the river and across the bridge. Some of the oldest carvings are the Kindly Shepherd, St. Nicholas and Mother Earth. Near the dam are the Light of the World and the Feather. I must admit I find these most impressive. Small plaques beside each carving show the details of who they were carved by. The meaning of some of the carvings is quite clear. Here we have Cuckoo in Cage, Protection of the Rocks and Discus. However, others need more thinking about, like Natura Morte, Biological Beginnings and The Way of All Things. Our final view is this most striking carving, which was undertaken by Australian Angela Polglaze in 2002. However, before we leave the sculpture park, we must return to David to complete the story of Dick's Spot he was telling us earlier.
Behind this turret lies the site of the former farm of Callanesa, and it was on the lands of this farm that Dick Spot had incarcerated the troublesome spirit Ystrid Cunham under a boulder. The conditions had now both been fulfilled for the spirit to be released, since the diversion of the river to excavate the foundation had dried up the riverbed. The boulder had to be moved, but no local man would touch it, so they had to get some Irish navvies to blow it up. When the dust settled, a large toad crawled out from the debris, and afterwards for many nights there were loud disturbances. Even in recent times, whenever we tried to make hay on this field, we always had rain on it before it was harvested.
When you return to your car, you will find a small picnic area with a selection of carvings that appeal to the younger visitor. On the opposite side of the car park is a very imaginative playground, further evidence that youngsters have not been neglected. If you feel like something more energetic, there are several short walks that are suitable for most visitors. Starting from the village, the Garth Bush Trail rises through woodlands. Suddenly, a break in the trees allows us a view across the surrounding valley. About halfway round, the walk passes into the Llanwddyn Valley. Thomas ap Morris ap John set apart this piece of land as a Quaker burial ground. In the mid-17th century, the Morris family were well-known Quakers and lived in the nearby farm of Llanwddyn. The second part of the walk takes its rather steep hill up into the forest. As you come clear of the trees, you find the trail is once again in the Vyrnwy Valley, overlooking the lake and dam. Finally, you face only a short downhill walk back to the village. You may decide that as the road is flat, you prefer to get some fresh air and travel by bicycle. You must take care to avoid cars, but in quieter times it's a good way to both exercise and view the lake. You can hire cycles at two places in the village, at the Artisans Cafe and at the cafe in the village workshops. There are several longer walks on the hills and moors that surround the valley that are ideal for the more energetic. Our look round the lake would take us in a clockwise direction from the dam. Only a few hundred yards on is this very impressive piece of work by Andy Hancock. The pecking order pole depicts 9 birds that can be found in the area. The buzzard, grey heron, kingfisher and great spotted woodpecker, tawny owl, black grouse and crossbill, and nuthatch and jay. A short distance along the lakeside is this small car park. Down at the water's edge is the building that was the former Liverpool Corporation boathouse. Dave Proctor started Bethanian Adventure in 1984 and now runs a variety of water sports based on the boathouse. During the warmer months of the year, many schools and youth groups take to the water in canoes. Most of Dave's activities are water-based, with sailing and windsurfing taking place on the lake. Especially in the winter, the extra water flowing over the weir makes whitewater rafting and canoeing exhilarating. Dave also offers instruction in such events as archery and climbing at Ruaga. Opposite the boathouse is the start of the Llanwddyn Trail. This meanders through the forest to emerge just before Hufford Car Park. Back on the road again. After about 3/4 of a mile you come across this small picnic area, from where you can get a good view of the lake, the hotel and the straining tower. On a fine summer day, the views of the hills, accompanied by the sound of lapping water, fit in well with a delicious picnic. The large tables are of a somewhat unusual design, but blend in well, and the whole park is improved by this unusual sculpture. Our foot car park can be found a further 2 miles up the lake. This is one of the smaller sites set out as a very pleasant picnic area. In the next bay the road takes a long loop and passes over Pont Einant. Under the water in this bay are the remains of Einant Hall that David mentioned earlier. Shortly after crossing Pont Einant, a small winding hill road leads away from the lake up the Einant Valley. If you take this road, at the head of the valley you will come to a T-junction. This cross marks the old pilgrims' route from northwest Wales to St David's. The road to the left drops down to Dinas Mawddwy on the Machynlleth to Dolgellau road. If you decide to turn right, the road leads over the hills to the Llanwddyn at the head of Bala Lake. But you don't want to leave Lake Vyrnwy, do you? So let's travel on until we find the car park at Rhawaga. As the road approaches the northern end of the lake, a small track leads off left, over a cattle grid and into a small car park. Here you will find the best place from which to start the third walk we mentioned earlier. The Rhawaga trail follows the steep-sided valley up the western side of a small stream. The rise and fall of the land is not too severe, and the path is suitable for most walkers. Taking a short rest is no disgrace, especially as you can admire the waterfall from a distance. Over a bridge, then a short walk brings us to a small park where we find the waterfall. This is the largest waterfall round the lake, and is especially impressive after heavy rainfall. Below the falls is a very pleasant picnic area, and the pools are a magnet for children on sunny summer days. As you reluctantly leave the waterfall, take the track down the other side of the valley. When you get to this point, you have a choice. Either go right, back to the car park, or left to continue the walk. I am sure that you are still full of walking, so let's go on. The track leads us to this small path running beside the Bala road. It then crosses the road to the new bridge. I am sure that there is no danger of getting your feet wet, unless there has been a lot of overnight rain. Finally we pass the old farm building of Alt Forgan and take the path through the fields. I am sure you will find this a very pleasant walk, which really can be regarded as something all visitors should try. Let's carry on with our travels. At the head of the lake, this small road leaves the lakeside. It is a tortuous single track that passes over moorlands to the town of Barla. This and the Dinas Road are single track with passing places, and you must travel along them with great care. At the head of the lake there are two well-hidden hides provided by the RSPB. Path to the Centenary hide is rather spooky in wet weather, but is well worth the walk. The final hide is close to the road and gives a good view across the top of the lake to the hills beyond. The last of our walks is the Tiocha Trail. This rises quite steeply and goes parallel to the lake but above it. It is not a very strenuous walk, but still gives beautiful views across the lake. The road along the northern shore is pleasant, with views across the lake. Just over halfway down the lake we come to the sign for the lakeside tea rooms. This was the farmhouse built by Liverpool Corporation to accommodate the Ellis family, who had to move from their former farm of Tiocha when it was submerged by the rising waters of the lake. After 1911 the house was used for a succession of corporation employees, mainly shepherds. The last one was Ian Williams. In 1998 Jackie and Chris Clark took over the farm and have established a tea room in the farmhouse. The combination of farm and tea room has now become a thriving business. We now come to the final car park, the Old Village car park. Here you will find these otters, somewhat weathered, carved from an old oak tree root. Pass through the narrow entrance into a small lakeside park, which has been thoughtfully set out among the trees to give the visitors another picnic area. When you come down to the water's edge, you can see 3 dolphins playing in the water. In fact, they have been carved from a 150-year-old Corsican pine. On the other side of the road is a new trail installed by Severn Trent. A short path leads to a Douglas fir, which is the tallest tree in Wales. The last part of our journey crosses Pont Cynon, from where a long drive leads up to the hotel and the very welcome tavern bar. This is our final stop, as the dam is only a short distance away. The hotel has grown a great deal since it was built at the same time as the dam. It is difficult to imagine a more picturesque surrounding, as the hotel is set between the moorlands and the lake. The tavern bar beckons and is a fitting choice for our final refreshing drink.
I hope we have shown you that this peaceful valley has got a unique character and a most interesting history.
There's quite a lot to be seen round Lake Vyrnwy, and I hope that we have persuaded you to return to the tranquil beauty of this changing valley.